Hi everyone, how are you all doing? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Rinima Borah and you are watching another episode of my solo podcast, Shh. So this is episode 8. I can't believe we got to 8 already. And today we are diving into one of the most transformative years of my life, which spans from the ages 28 to 31. Now, last time in episode 7, we spoke about ages 22 to 28, the whirlwind of lessons, heartbreaks, and life experiences that shaped me. But this episode, this one is different. This is the story of rock bottom, of losing everything, including the person I thought I could never live without, my data, and somehow coming out of it as the Rinima you see today. So get comfortable, my friends, because this is going to be real, raw, and deeply personal. But let's go back to where it all began. When I met my third ex-toxic boyfriend, as we will call him from this point on, Chutia. So meeting Rishi, aka Chutia, let me tell you about this last hopefully toxic ex-boyfriend of my life. But yeah, you get it. The name really suits him well. So by far I have Gandu, I have Fatang, and now Chutia. But this phase of my life where everything seemed to fall apart at once, I had debts piling up, my dad's health was seriously deteriorating, my family was starting to rely on me in ways I couldn't always meet financially, and yet I didn't know how to be alone. My first 2 relationships had ended in heartbreak. Both the men cheated on me, both were violent, and neither had the capacity to be a provider. And I was too young, wasn't I? I was too lost and too heartbroken to make sense of it all. And then came Chutia. Now, who is this guy? I met him in Assam during a period when I was still reeling from everything. I too spoke about how I had to leave Bangalore in the last episode because of my financial struggles, and they were overwhelming me. I couldn't afford my rent. I didn't have a steady job. So I really had no choice but to return home to mom and dad to regroup and to try to figure out my next steps in life. And during that time, I met Chutia at a party. He was a DJ from Bangalore who had come to Assam for a gig, a Bengali guy, but living out of Bangalore at the time. He was charming, yes, but also very manipulative, a quality I didn't fully grasp until much, much later. And I was in no position, to be honest, to start a relationship, but escapism is a very funny thing. I ignored every red flag because I was desperate for a distraction. So we started talking, and soon after he became a presence in my life, but not in a way that was ever supportive. Let me get that right off the bat. I confided nothing in him. Not my debts, not my struggles, not about my dad's health, nothing. Because deep down I knew he didn't have the capacity to understand or help. And honestly, that says everything about the relationship already, doesn't it? Like from day one, I was emotionally alone even when I was with him. But I swept all of this under the rug because all I wanted at that point was to believe that things would get better. I wanted to believe in him, even when his actions screamed otherwise. And looking back, I do see the signs so clearly. He was flirting with other girls from the very beginning of the relationship. There was always a sneaky, manipulative quality to him. And then, of course, there was violence. I was paying all the bills, even his bills. It started small, right? The arguments that we had, but it escalated into shouting matches. But soon enough, it became physical. Again, my third violent relationship. And yet I stayed. Why? Because I didn't know how to leave. I didn't know how to be alone, and shame on me for that. Felt like I had nothing to hold on to anymore, It was like I was walking on a tightrope with no safety net beneath me. So today we will talk about those transformative years, the mistakes I made, the lessons, and the resilience it took to get out of the darkness and to kind of emerge as the Rinima Borah I am today. Actually, Rinima Borah Agarwal, but there's so much to it. And this is a deeply personal story, but one I hope will resonate with anyone I know, who's felt like life had them against the ropes. So let's get into it quickly. So, I tried to keep my life afloat, but the reality was I was drowning. At 28, my debts were spiraling out of control. I was borrowing money from ex-colleagues and friends and all Tom, Dick, and Harry just to survive. And there I was, spending what little I had to keep Chutia happy. I was buying wine, I was paying for his meals, I was covering expenses because he never had the money to contribute from day bloody one. Forget being a provider. He always had excuses. I found myself running back to Assam once again after returning to Bangalore the first time because I told myself I would try to rebuild there, maybe even start a business and maybe just settle down in Assam this second time. But in truth, I was running away. I was running away from Bangalore, from the reality of my financial struggles, from house owners to bank EMIs to private money lenders, from the mess of my life, what it had become, and maybe even from myself, actually. Chutia, a few months later, decided to join me in Assam because he lived in Bangalore at that point as well, claiming he wanted to support me. But I think we all know he was just as aimless as I was. He ended up staying in an Airbnb. We ended up staying in an Airbnb guest house in Guwahati for about 2.5, 3 months. It was a nice place, something I booked because I still valued my comfort. A decision that drained me financially later. So I paid for almost everything, like I said, from day one: rent, food, alcohol, you name it. He contributed next to nothing. And I was too drained to even confront him about it, But even in that guest house, in those early months of our relationship, the toxicity was undeniable. During this time, our lives revolved around drinking, partying, junk eating, and basically escaping reality. I partied with his friends, a crowd of event organizers and DJs in Guwahati who were more interested in their next drink than anything meaningful. Well, calling it as I saw it. He would flirt with other girls right in front of me. And I would question him, of course, and he would call me insecure or the fact that I was crazy or possessive. And guess what? I believed him. I let him manipulate me into thinking that I was the problem. There was even a point where he tried to normalize his behavior by inviting me to these parties, both in Bangalore and Guwahati, where I found myself sitting in a room with women he had been intimate with before. And he expected me to be just okay with it or just accept it. And I did for a while because I thought that's what it meant to be to be a chill girlfriend, to be a cool girlfriend, and it wasn't. It was bloody toxic. And then at one of those house parties, I met her, the girl who would come back into my life 2.5 years later with the truth that shattered everything. This girl was an Assamese girl, a crazy one, a tall, striking, and apparently had some history as a Miss India finalist or semi-finalist, whatever. Well, there was this one night at a party he took me in Guwahati, and I could see Chutia was being overly friendly with her, He kept leaving me with his friends because I knew no one in the party, while he kept hanging out with this girl in the kitchen because she was cooking. And I again confronted him about it later, but as always, he dismissed me, calling me insecure and making me feel like I was the problem, the famous gaslighting issue. I ignored the red flags. I swept everything under the rug like I've been doing from the beginning, and I kept moving forward with this guy. But looking back now, I can see how I let myself tolerate the intolerable, I was so focused on escaping my own problems that I clung to someone that was only dragging me down further, and I couldn't see it. I see it now, how lost I was. But at the time, I just kept telling myself, wait, Rinima, it's gonna get better. And meanwhile, I was dealing with the heartbreak of losing dope. Fatang, being the typical petty dickhead that he was, couldn't really handle the fact that I was moving on from a 6-year violent relationship because of what he did to me. So one day when I was in Bangalore, he barged into my house unannounced, claiming he just wanted to see dope, cried and did all the drama, and I fell for it. So he got inside my house, grabbed dope, walked out saying I didn't deserve him, a punishment because I broke up with him. And this was the dog I raised, I left my job for, cared for, spent every penny on, my baby, my first baby. And it was pure spite on his part, punishing me in the worst way possible. And after that, I did everything I could to get dope back for a year. I went to police stations. I followed up on leads. I tried to find his house. I searched for him everywhere, spoke to his friends, begged Fatang, but nothing worked. And I was completely lost, Right out of the guest house in Guwahati, while all of this was going on, while I was juggling with the chaos of this fucked up relationship with Chutia and trying to see if I can establish a business in Guwahati and start making money and coping with the fact that dope was no longer with me, life threw me another devastating curveball. My dad's kidneys failed, where he looked so swollen and unwell during a video call, weak, and I knew after years of diabetes, I knew it immediately that it was serious because I did a lot of research and reading about it. But Dad ever the fighter, insisted he was fine, refusing to leave for treatment because somehow he knew we didn't have the money. I remember begging, crying, and even threatened that I will harm myself if he didn't come to Guwahati for a checkup. And he finally relented. That same night, they came over. However, I had no money at all. I was scraping by, drowning in debts, and searching for answers of what I was going to do. You know, this is where I really believe the power of manifestation came in. I remember chanting, visualizing, manifesting solutions, and somehow, through sheer determination and belief, the universe aligned with me. Because that night when Dad came and we put him in Apollo Hospital, I didn't have a single buck. But one of the investors that I've been pitching to for my business in Guwahati stepped in, offering me an advance of 5 lakhs because he knew the situation of my dad. He knew my situation and no strings attached. I'm forever grateful to that man. And that money really saved my dad's life, at least gave him a few extra years. We rushed him to Apollo Hospital in Guwahati the same night, where it was confirmed that both his kidneys have now failed after almost 10 to 15 years of diabetes. And he needed immediate life support, dialysis. And after one session, he was in the ICU, and after one session, I realized the treatment there was subpar, so we immediately transferred him to Guwahati International Hospital. But the bills were piling up, you know, and it somehow became clear to me that the business I was trying to set up in Guwahati wasn't going to work, because it wasn't going to give my dad the health insurance that I always got at corporate jobs. So I knew I needed a stable corporate job again with health insurances for my parents. And that's when I made the decision that, all right, that's it. I need to return to Bangalore for good, for the second time this time, and this time driven solely by the need to secure a job for his medical treatment. And you know, during this time, as my dad was in and out of these hospitals in Guwahati for dialysis, Rishi finally met him for the first time because he was in Guwahati at the time as well. And I remember introducing them at the hospital in Guwahati, and and I could immediately sense Dad's disappointment. Like, he was a pretty expressive man. He couldn't keep a poker face. He didn't say much, my dad, initially, but I knew what he was thinking and what was going on in his mind. He was my dad after all. And later, when we had some time alone in the hospital itself, Dad told me plainly once he got off the ICU that, hey, Muna, that's what he called me. I never interfered in your relationships before. Like, I have let you and your sister make your own decisions because your mother and I married out of love, and I always believed that both of you knew what's right for yourself. We raised you correctly. But this boy, he's the worst of the lot. Like, you're getting bad to worse. Like, he has nothing to offer you. Nothing emotionally, nothing financially, not as a partner in life. So what the hell are you doing? And he's like, I see you taking care of everything while he does nothing. And their parents, they have wisdom by their side, they can say things. And he wasn't blinded as I was. And he's like, if you stay with him, you're only going to suffer more, And his words hit me hard. But I still somehow at that point wasn't strong enough to walk away from that relationship. I didn't know how to be alone still. And that also told me something that stayed with me forever in that hospital in Guwahati. He said, Muna, you and I, we have the same heart. We are kind and we are selfless, we are giving, we are very family oriented. But don't let that make you blind to reality. Like, you need to think about your future. And this boy isn't it. And he said something very important, that men always change, it gets worse. And it was one of the last pieces of advice he gave me about my relationships, actually. And I wish I had heeded it sooner, for sure. But after sending him back from the hospitals back home, after stabilizing, I returned to Bangalore on the 31st of December 2019. And I remember I found temporary work in a private firm in Bangalore just a few days later, which just gave me enough money to survive, to rent a new small place and arrange some money for Dad and Mom to join me in Bangalore, because Dad was getting worse and I knew that Guwahati wasn't the place I wanted him to get treatment anymore. It has worsened my dad's condition by the time I came back. So I got him admitted in St. John's Hospital in Bangalore for a checkup and regular dialysis, And it was during this period that I made one of the worst decisions of my life, which I will regret till the last breath. One of Chutia's cousins was getting married and I insisted on going to the wedding despite my mom and dad begging me to stay because they were admitted in St. John's, and I never did that to them before, and dad was critically ill. I somehow at this point got influenced and manipulated by Chuti, and I convinced myself that I deserved to think of my own life for once, because I wasn't all this while. But it was a mistake I truly regret deeply. That's not me. I spent money, I bought Chutia's tickets, my tickets, I ensured Chutia had proper clothes for the wedding, and all the while, I can't believe my focus shifted to this guy. I could feel my priorities slipping, this whole time. And when I returned from the wedding, my mom and I had a fallout, and I don't blame her. But dad's dialysis continued. They all did well. They got out of the hospital. I started finding stability again in my life. And by May 14th, I got my job back at Dell. Gosh, and with it came the health insurance for dad again. I remember calling my mom that day. Once I cleared the interview, and I'm like, Mom, don't pawn anything anymore. It's not like we had anything left to pawn. We pawned every piece of gold that we had. Dad and you are now insured. And it was a moment of immense relief and gratitude, knowing that the universe had once again aligned to save us. I shouldn't have left Dell in the first place. Again, one of the worst decisions of my life. So for 6 months, my parents stayed with me in Bangalore while I worked and paid debts and tried to keep everything afloat. And I was just starting to find a balance back in life. But this was also the period when the cracks in my third relationship with Chutia, it deepened. It's setting the stage for the downward spiral that followed right after. So hard to talk about all these things. So after mom and dad left and I was finally in Bangalore now, I found my footing and, things were starting to very ever so slightly get better. I also managed to get dope back after months and months of trying, but my financial struggles were still crushing me. Chutia was now in Bangalore too. He was living at Bangalore at the time anyways, and we made the biggest mistake of moving in together despite all the fucking toxicity. I thought it might bring some stability, oh man, but it was the exact opposite, He, once again, and as predicted, contributed almost nothing financially. I was paying the bulk of the rent, buying the groceries, and covering almost all of our expenses, even his cigarettes sometimes. He had to drink every weekend for some reason, and I wasn't even the drinker. Anyway, the fights became worse, violent and unrelenting. He would accuse me of things I hadn't done, project his insecurities onto me, and he would manipulate me into staying despite all this crap. There was also times that he would threaten me of leaving. I remember falling on his feet to not leave me. But the turning point came when my dad passed away. Yep. I lost dad just 2 years into this relationship, and losing him shattered me in ways I can't even begin to describe. This man was my hero, my confidant, my everything. And then finally when he was gone one day, despite me trying to keep him alive as best as I could, something inside me changed. And I realized that if I could survive losing my father, I could really survive anything else in the world. But honestly, losing my dad was the single most defining moment of my life. It's something that no amount of preparation can ever ready you for. And you will understand if you have ever lost your parent or parents. My dad wasn't just my father. He was really my best friend, my confidant, my advisor, my hero, my provider. He gave up everything for my mom, sister, and I. His time, his money, his dreams, his friends. He sacrificed it all so that my sister and I could grow up with every opportunity that he didn't have as a child. He never once thought of himself. Ever since I have been born into this world, I never saw dad being selfish. Even in his last years, when his health was deteriorating, he never complained because he didn't want to be a burden. He stayed strong for us, even though I knew he was in severe pain. He had arthritis and whatnot, hypertension, diabetes. So the day he passed away is one I will never forget. I wasn't home. Of course, I was in Bangalore. My mom had gone to work that day, and Ronnie, my nephew, and my sister were with him. So he was sitting in the veranda, and he was not feeling well because when my neighbor auntie asked him, you don't look well. He's like, yeah, I'm not feeling well. Then he came up to take a nap, and when my sister found him gasping for air, she ran to him panicked. But even in his final last 20 seconds, he consoled my sister. His last words to her were, "Don't panic, Jan, everything will be fine." And seconds later, he was gone. He just put his head on my sister's shoulder and he was gone. He died of a heart attack. I was in Bangalore, I was in Delhi at the time when I got the call from my mom, and my world just shattered. I fucking couldn't believe it. I took the next flight home, and that journey was the hardest of my life, those hours. I cried the whole time. I couldn't stop remembering every moment we shared, every lesson he taught me. And the 4-hour drive from the airport to my home bloody felt endless. It wasn't him picking me up anymore, and I finally saw him motionless. It broke me. That man who was so full of life, so selfless, so kind, so active was no longer here. It's really changed everything. It wasn't just the grief of losing the man who had been my anchor or my best friend or my confidant or my biggest supporter, my biggest cheerleader. It was also this hard realization that I had lost the one person who truly believed in me unconditionally. In those final years of his life, Dad often shared his fears and feelings with me, and I did the same. He would call me and tell me, "Muna, you and I always had a different bond, like the most special one. We understand each other in ways that no one else does in the family or anywhere, But I worry about what will happen when I'm gone. Like your mom and your sister, they are different than us. They will maybe judge you. They will maybe fight with you. But please promise me one thing, that you will never give up on Ronnie, my nephew. He said he's a special boy and he loves you like you are his own parent. So please raise him for me as I raised you." And I made that promise to Dad, and not knowing then how much it would shape my life later on. But after his passing, when I felt like I couldn't go on and I almost wanted to go away from this world, it was Ronnie who gave me purpose. Every time I thought of giving up, I remembered that promise I made to Dad. I remembered Dad's words and the responsibility he had really entrusted to me. And it was no longer just about surviving for myself, It was no longer about being selfish. It was about being that parent figure Ronnie needed, the way my data had been for me. And it's why to this day, if you know Ronnie, if you're on my Instagram, you see him every day. I see Ronnie as my own son, not my nephew. He's the shadow of my father, a living reminder of everything my dad stood for. And while it felt like, that my world shattered when Dad really passed away, and it also forced me to rebuild myself, to pick myself back up for Ronnie, for myself, for my family, and ultimately, for Dad. But I was a different person after losing Dad. It really made me realize the fragility of life. How fragile, the importance of every moment and the futility of holding on to toxic relationships. If I could live without my dad, the most important loved person of my life, I now know that I could live without anyone. I didn't look at boyfriends the same way anymore. And that realization was the beginning of my transformation. The Rinima that you truly see today. Yeah, so his passing made me reevaluate everything. It gave me the courage to finally face the truth about my relationship with Chutia. I wasn't scared of being alone anymore like I have been in this last couple of years of my life, almost my whole life, because I've already faced the greatest loss of my life, So almost a month after Dad passing, everything unraveled. Remember that girl I mentioned from the party? The tall girl who was cooking, who Chutia was flirting with 2 months into our relationship in that house party? The one I suspected but chose to ignore because I didn't want to face the truth? Well, she came back into my life. And this time, she had receipts. Right after Dad passed away, Chutia, I confronted Chutia saying that things weren't going well and I just wanted to take a break, if not break up completely and see how things goes, which means we had to live away from each other. So since the house was mine, all the furniture, all the security deposit, it was only wise that he moved away. And I asked him to start looking for other apartments while I started looking for roommates to share the rent. So I shared this Instagram story saying that I'm now looking for a female roommate in this rent house in Indiranagar. She just has to pay the rent. It's a fully furnished place. Security deposit is paid up. And there's this one guy, a non-Indian guy, a European guy, I forgot where exactly he was from. He followed me on Instagram and he reached out saying that, hey, his ex-girlfriend was looking for a place and that if you could pass on my number. I'm like, yep, sure. And then I get this WhatsApp, from this girl, and I see the number is already saved, and this is the same girl. And we exchanged number on that night of the party because she clicked a selfie and she wanted to send it to me, and she took my WhatsApp number to do so. And she's like, wait, are you the same Rinima who was dating the DJ? I'm like, yeah. She's like, dude, did you not know that he cheated on you? I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, right after that party, the next day we hooked up for straight 2 nights. And these are the receipts we were talking about. And I remember going straight down to Chutia's room and saying, you have 30 minutes to get the hell out of my house. She showed me screenshots of messages, their nude pictures, and everything else that I didn't actually have to say, or maybe I had to. Because all this while I knew he was doing something, I just didn't believe it. Well, she told me how Chutia had cheated on me with her, how he manipulated her the same way he manipulated me. And it all made sense, the sneaky behavior, the uncalled fight, the gaslighting. And this time I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even feel the need to argue. Like I said, I went straight downstairs to his room, showed him the evidence, and I told him that he had exactly 30 minutes to pack his things and get the hell out of my house. Well, the guy begged, he pleaded, he cried, he even fell on my feet. But I really didn't care anymore. I was done. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. Kicking him out wasn't just about ending the relationship. It was about finally reclaiming my power. It was about valuing myself finally and acknowledging my worth and refusing to let anyone treat me as less than I deserved anymore. And the moment he walked out of that door, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years, let me tell you. And from that point onwards, my friend, from 31, the next 18 months were truly the most transformative period of my life, where I found me. For the first time since I was 17 years old, I was single. No boyfriends, no violence, no cheating, no distractions, no controlling, just me. It was terrifying at first. I didn't know how to be alone. But slowly I started to rediscover who I was. I focused on my health. I went to the gym, my fitness, my career. I was thriving at Dell. I was looking better. I was eating better. I poured all that energy I invested on these dickheads into clearing my debts, rebuilding my finances, creating my life that I had always dreamed of. And I started going to the gym every day, eating healthier and taking care of myself in ways I really hadn't in years. Traveling, and I started therapy, which really helped me unpack all the trauma I had been carrying from my past relationships and childhood, whatever trauma I've been through. But most importantly, I found self-love. I started to love myself. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to seek validation from a partner or from anyone. I realized that I was enough, that I had always been enough, and that I was amazing, a fantastic human being, a kind soul, and that I didn't need anyone to complete me. And this period of solitude was when I truly grew into the woman you see today. I found strength in my independence. And that's why I hope that for so many of you, I found confidence in my abilities, and I found peace in my solitude. My company became my most favorite company. And that's the story I will share in the next episode, which is going to be episode 9 of how I spent those 18 months transforming my life step by step for the best. But you know what? Looking back now, I am so grateful, and this is my shock saying for all that I went through, for everything I really went through, yes. Even the pain, the violence, the heartbreak, and the financial struggles, the loss. Because, without it, I wouldn't be who I am today, and I love who I am today. Every struggle taught me a lesson. Every setback pushed me forward, and every loss made me stronger. And to anyone listening to this, particularly my girls, if you're in a dark place right now, please know that it's not the end. It might be long, but it's not the end. You are so much more stronger than you think. You are capable of overcoming anything life throws at you. And you are worthy of the love and the happiness that you actually dream of. But you know what that starts with? It starts with loving yourself. Precisely why self-love is such a big word. My story is far from over. But I can tell you this. I am no longer the girl who tolerates less than what she deserves. I am no longer the girl who's afraid of being alone. I am the woman my dad always believed I could be. And I know that he's smiling down on me, proud of the person that I have finally become from up above. I feel his presence. It's omnipresent, but I feel it. And I can't believe it had to be this way. He had to go away for me to become this person. But thank you so much for listening to this deeply personal episode of Shh. And this was episode 8, covering my journey from ages of 28 to 31, the heartbreaks, the losses, and the transformation that came from it all. If this story resonates with you in any way, please do let me know in the comments. Let's share, let's make this world a kinder place. And don't forget to join me in the next episode, which I do once every month, where I will dive into those amazing 18 months of being single and how they became the most transformative period of my life. But until next time, my dear subscribers and non-subscribers, do take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember, you are enough.